Greetings. This is the first of our video discussions about the pieces of literature we're studying. There won't be one necessarily with each of the lessons within the course, just because progressively as you move along in the material, the idea is to mostly be focused on the discussion boards. But just kind of as we're getting started with the course, I'd like to take a few moments to look at some of the pieces and kind of talk about what's going on within them. The Story of an Hour is actually a relatively interesting piece with its general structure. A story of a woman who's afflicted with a heart disease. Her husband apparently has passed on due to an accident in the trains as he's coming back and commuting back from work. The family friend Richards realizes that the husband's been supposedly killed. Double checks it, so he does his due diligence. He sends back another telegraph, gets the communication back, and once again gets confirmation that the husband has indeed died and is a member, was on the train, and then proceeds to go to the house to actually bear this information to the wife to make certain that Ms. Mallard doesn't actually drop dead and all because somebody else comes along and tells it in a way that isn't sympathetic to her unique situation. It's a unique aspect of a lot of what Chopin does within her work, because a lot of this, as you see the males within her pieces, and while the females are structured to not necessarily want to be within a realm of men, they want independence, they want freedom, they want some sort of unique awakening to who they themselves are and be able to embrace that. The men really aren't overall that bad within the pieces. They're typical to the society they're part of, and in some cases are actually nicer than most people would expect. So in this particular story, Richard shows up along with Ms. Mallard's sister, Josephine. They slowly but surely break the news to Ms. Mallard, and Louisa goes upstairs into her bedroom and decides to take some time to be able to figure out how she's going to move forward. And it's a unique situation, and I think it's really one of those where it makes the mood of this particular piece rather unique. For me, when I read the story, I don't picture a bedroom necessarily. I picture almost a dank, dark attic with a little chair sitting looking out in the window. Now, I know that's not what the scene actually puts together, but it just kind of fits with how she feels inside. Her mood is one initially of the grief you would expect a person to have when their spouse is dead, when they've been told they're not coming home. It's not unexpected grief. It's what's supposed to be there. And the reason I like that dark, almost gloomy feel to it is because of the shifting in moods that takes place within her as she moves from having the absolute sense of mourning and grief and all to his loss to suddenly the giggle comes out of her, the sense of freedom, the sense of, rejuvenation within her soul as she goes through the process of realizing that her husband's death has now freed her the constraints that society places on her to be subjugated underneath her husband's will. Her husband's not described as being overtly harsh, mean, cruel, or anything of that sort. She says that he's been nice to her and kind. She says that she's loved him sometimes. But it's still a situation that because of the way society works, even if he's the nicest of guys, there's an expectation that she has to be a certain way because she's married to him. Now you may say, well, what's the freedom that she gets and all by him being dead? Well, simply put, as a widow, she'll be actually able to do anything that she wants to without people impressing certain societal expectations on her. In fact, there's a lot of freedom that can come with it because people will attribute any weird behaviors or abnormalities in her behavior to simply being overcome with grief and all about her husband dying. People are going to be sympathetic to her. They're going to be open to her needs. They're going to be tender. They're going to be nice. And with this, she can take advantage of this opportunity. Not to say that she's out for advantage, but she's certainly going to be able to maximize the opportunity to really discover who she is. I mean, imagine if you've been in a relationship for a very long time, you suddenly aren't in one. What is it like to wake up the next day with having to be concerned about that person's emotions, that person's needs, that person's wants, that person's expectations of who you are, and society's expectations of who you will be to that person? There are a lot of constraints, even now, to what it means to be married to somebody with your behaviors and mannerisms and how you act. There's a certain degree of not quite subjugation, but certainly giving that comes and all from being in a relationship, that once the relationship is dissolved through whatever means, you're suddenly free from and able to be the individual once again. It's not something those of us that are happy in marriage or in a relationship really look forward to. In fact, we lament and we fear the day that this happens. But if you're somebody that feels oppressed and all by the systems in place, then even the passing of the individual would give you a certain degree of freedom. And in some ways, at least if they passed, it wasn't you breaking their heart or running away from them or failing your obligations. Fate just took control. So she goes through the process of awakening, and when she goes through it, really, for me, the mood outside shifts. It becomes bright and shiny. It's almost like the rejuvenation of the world itself around her, a reawakening of everything within her and outside of her and around her. And this joy fills the room as she goes through this process. Her sister, of course, outside the door, begging to be let in, afraid her sister's in there having a heart attack over her husband dying. And once she composes herself, she goes out the door, heads downstairs, and Brantley Mallard, her husband, comes through the doorway using the latch key that's sitting outside. She sees him and drops dead. The Schmoop video asks the question of, did she die for shame or guilt or anything else like that? And I think the reality when we look at a lot of Chopin's works is simply this. When one of her female characters experiences an awakening of self, they're unable to go back to a world where that self is no longer in existence. It's kind of like the proverbial, uncorking the bottle and you let the contents out, pushing it back in is almost impossible to do. Same type of concept. I mean, she can't go back to being underneath her husband. She can't go back to no dreams. She can't go back to hopelessness. She can't go back to wondering when it's all going to be over. And she does have that unique factor of being able to, frankly, tap out with a heart attack. I mean, it was more than like it was a heart attack that happened. Her heart gave out from the disease that she had already. And it gave her an easy situation to be able to still have that freedom. Because in death and all, if he's not dead, she's dead. Now she can still be whoever she wants to, just in the next world, if you will. I don't think there's a question of whether she felt grief or not. She certainly didn't feel shame because she felt the way she did. She felt she had paid proper respect to her relationship, and she had acknowledged the goodness within Brantley Mallard. It's just she knew who she wanted to be at this point, and if he was going to be alive, she wasn't going to be. Now, the big question that comes up is Kate Chopin a feminist? And the fact of the matter is that she's not. She's written numerous different pieces over the years and different interviews that took place during her lifetime that she was not a feminist. Not in the sense that it was at the time she was alive, and in all honesty, she wasn't associated with feminism until the 1960s and 70s when that movement really took off within America, and her work suddenly resurfaced within colleges and universities as being kind of this testimonial of the idea of female empowerment. But she herself did not embrace the idea of a feminist movement. And if you really think about it, it kind of makes sense, because she's not suggesting what feminism in her era at the extreme level would have suggested, which is you do not need men. She has no problem with her characters needing and wanting to be with men. In her piece, The Awakening, the character actually does fall for somebody else. She actually realizes that there are aspects to a relationship and her sexuality and herself that she needs to embrace. So it's not a case of men are bad, men are horrible, men are oppressive. It's not about that. It's not necessarily about, righting wrongs or, the gender gap or inequalities in that sense. It's a sense of knowing who you are yourself. Her characters and her mindset already existed within the world. They're kind of like with Michelangelo talking about the sculptures within clay, or marble, that it already exists there, that it's the artist that brings it out. She had the same philosophy about her literature. The characters are already there, they speak to her, and she tells her stories. And if you look at the way these characters are, they're just not embodied within that feminist tone. Now, do they have certain things that certainly are representative of the current feminist movement? Sure, of course. They do fit, and they're a piece and a testament to any marginalized group within our society, whether it be females, people that are gay, trans, bi, anything else like that, and all can find a heroine within this particular piece of literature. However, It's not her intent. And I think, in all honesty, if we really look at the time period, if she had actually labeled herself as feminist, she would have found a shrinking of her audience, her impact, and her ability to reach people with the story of these characters. So that's the story of an hour in a brief nutshell, just adding a little bit of information on what was already told before. I will post another video soon on A Rose for Emily.